Good morning, good evening, good night, everyone, family caregivers, older persons. Welcome back to Lana's Little Things with me, Dr. Lana, specialist gerontologist, where we talk all things on living agelessly, bridging generational gaps, family caregiving, the love and the work that goes into that, entrepreneurship, and just life itself, and how life can just change on a dime and change on a whim. But for this special Senior September, I've been talking with some fantastic guests who've had unique experiences in the world of aging or the world of caregiving, or just interacting with on a social scale and helping us to see how community matters. So we've had Angela, we've had Daniela, we've had my brother, whose personal story as caregiver, and now for our final segment, part 4 of 4, we're gonna have one of my dearest friends, who's a nurse, and I'm going to introduce her, and you will get to see why I love her so much. So, just to introduce this fascinating lady, Mechell Marshall. She is definitely one of the highly respected nurses in public health. Well known, she's known not just for her abilities and knowledge, but also her thinking outside of the box. That's why I specifically love her way and her approach. She's a midwife. She's an advocate for community wellness, for sure. And she's also been awarded Public Health Nurse of the Year just last year, 2024, by the Barbados Nurses Association. Okay. She's held multiple leadership roles, including former commissioner of the National Commission, former second vice president of Barbados Nurses Association, and former vice president of the National Association of Women. In 2006, she made history as only the second Barbadian to serve as regional nursing director for Region 4 of the Caribbean Nurses Organization, where she then advanced nursing leadership across the Caribbean. And that, as our Caribbean nurses would know, that means a whole lot to have nurses more empowered. She, as a committed social advocate, Mechell has delivered numerous public health lectures on family wellness, climate change, and she's contributed to regional research on introducing unusual substances, unusual herbal medications such as hemp as sustainable resources. Her work integrates non-communicable disease prevention, gentle parenting, I love that expression, and planet-centered food security solutions. And obviously, as a midwife, she remains deeply passionate about making birth a happy, empowering event where families thrive. So we bring new babies into a happy world. Welcome, Nurse Mechell. And I am so excited. I'm going to get the audience to view the whole of you in 1 second. And it is fantastic to be here with you. So just welcome to everyone and welcome to you. So you want to tell us, is there anything I left out? Anything you wanted to add? You can unmute. There you are.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Lana, for such a wonderful introduction. I was wondering, oh my goodness, isn't she going to stop? But I am very, very happy to be here with you to have this conversation to such a wonderful and worthy audience. I mean, who you've identified, targeted, those elders, those persons that build our community, the foundations, the treasures, the libraries. And I'm really excited when people do specialty to value this particular population. So I am so honored to be here in this September to celebrate the month of the elderly, where we can have these conversations towards improving their well-being for 2025 and beyond.
Definitely. So what is your passion when it comes to, what is your view when, or your vision, I should say, for older persons as it pertains to health and any particular aspects of health that you're especially passionate about?
because I work in public health, one of the primary concerns we're seeing now is the NCD. Where everybody's fighting NCDs, and I would like to see a society that ages without NCD. You know what I mean? We want to see a society that is disease free and that can have more primary interventions done, where our elderly are just coming to be maintained for their wellness and their health rather than treating disease and discomfort. So my vision or my dream or what I would like to see is active spaces for the elderly. I would like to see when I'm driving across Barbados in the parks, in the open spaces, spaces created specifically for them where they come and they meet. And it is one set of social interaction that is involved in movement. And retirement then becomes something to look forward to and to anticipate rather than to frown on it as this a place of debilitation or disability.
I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely. And it's not far-fetched because there are communities in Canada, Netherlands, and their parks specifically designed for older persons, yes, exercise little spots where they can exercise, but also where families can gather because it's the generational gaps, it's that bridging, it's that connection that we want from one, age group. So it's not a separation of us and them, but the younger ones see that aging is not, as I always say, a disease. It's not a disease, it's a process. And there's the wisdom of the sages, as we always say, that you can't get unless you've lived enough time. So instead of seeing it as something to be frowned upon or to be fair, even older persons societally, they can come and interact with their peers. But then we're not their peers. We can't talk about what happened before after the Second World War, and so that the older ones now can talk about. So they can interact with their peers and they can interact with the younger ones, and families can be more connected. I think it's a disconnection from the family side. Obviously, society is based on strong families. And if that breaks down, then the society views the older persons in the way they're being viewed at home, and that cycle continues. And that's a cycle that I share with you that I'd like to see broken as well. That the same us and them. Well, Gran is old now, and she can't, like, what is old? You know?
I completely agree with everything that you said. Actually, it's just a mirror reflection. It's very good that we are on the same page. Certainly we would be, but it's good that you can also see the vision and you also have that same vision for that population that is so worthy of enjoying comfort and having a space that is theirs that they can be free and move.
Now, how do you see that from a nursing perspective? How would or how could what would that do? Not, well, we know it would do for the physical health, but I know you are a mental health advocate extraordinaire. So can you explore that part of it for me? Because I think most people, as we had talked about earlier before we started, people think of mental health as, oh, treating a mental illness. That's not what it is at all. Can you expand on that?
So first, I thank Dr. Brathwaite, so the consultant psychiatrist at the psychiatric hospital. She had facilitated a 4-day intense mental health training gap. And this particular information helped me to be able to context and to be able to understand and have a vision for what, in fact, is a mental health commission concerned about our persons within our Barbadian society. So many times we're looking at all of these challenges and the elderly are left out. There is no conversation about the elderly. So when we think of mental health, we often think of the antenatal. Yes, in fact, the training was specifically because there was an identification that there were some gaps in, the postnatal period. And therefore, then, if we were to bring the nurses, public health up to scratch as it relates to identification and treatment and interventions of the mental illnesses that were present, and then give advantages and suggestions towards maintaining mental health in our population, then I can see like the application of mental health to the geriatric population. Now, how does that look?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really the same looking as if you were looking at the younger population, is those 9 spheres of wellness. You want them to be well physically, you want them to be well mentally, but the mental wellness is about, in my opinion, and from my observation, is about family, is about no abandonment, and is about integration and making things accommodative for them, because they have the same emotions, maybe a bit. It can be either in more intense or it can be less intense, because persons might think, oh, the elderly don't feel anything. Yes, they might not express it, or they might not express it by way of saying it, but then it might be expressed in their eating, either
Yes.
eating too much or too little, or they're sleeping too much or too little, or they're interacting too much, where they're very, very chatty, or no interaction at all. So these things are, for me, in terms of a nurse, is what we're looking at. And now the Barbados Community College has a specialty program for gerontology nursing. So they would have even greater tools to be able to look at that scope and those particular clients with a greater intensity, to be able to create programs that would support their well-being and longevity.
You're
Right.
right.
Mhm.
So for the that's um so that in a nutshell, folks, is mental wellness, which
Yes.
is mental health. So
Yes.
we want to reverse that, or I don't know, make a new dynamic, mental, and call it mental wellness,
Yes.
and as opposed to mental health, because that could bring up a whole set of things.
Mhm.
But so that's a
Mhm.
fantastic idea. We'll probably
Mhm.
adopt and say that a little more often, because it will bring about it can bring about a different way of thinking, and you
Yes.
see
Yeah.
a person a different way. Now, from a
Yeah.
nursing perspective, you see them before the doctor sees them. When you see them close in more close-knit connection with families, what would be your well, we are talking about our visions, but what are your present concerns for older person families, but in connected families, and in what do you call it, expanded, wider family communities, or grandest home still, and we still have some of that here, and
I
that
think
is
it's.
happening.
Go ahead.
No, and we do have that around the world, where we do have our interconnected families. What is your main concern, or what do you see as a nurse that I might not see?
I think one of my main concerns is abandonment, and that is manifested by when persons attend clinics, maybe they come alone, or they are using the clinics as social settings, where they're coming to the clinics to actually socialize, or where persons don't understand what is their responsibility towards the elderly. Like, I don't think the roles have been explained. So whereas in a time of old, you would know inherently, well, if Gran gets old, I take care of Gran. But now it's this kind of not knowing, or absence of knowing, or lack of knowledge relating to your responsibility to the elder, the person in your community, the person in your household. So I think it is really, for me, a major problem is abandonment, and abandonment out of fear. In that, sometimes they're just fearful of just how the person responds, because they're not accustomed to probably the change in dynamic of the psyche of the being. It might be that they themselves have not accepted or can face what aging looks like. So they abandon. So abandon for me is really high on the cards. It's hard to see clients in the hospital being left. So I'm like, who does that? Who leaves the treasure behind? Who leaves the library behind? Even if the library is unable to tell of its stories, the presence of the library is enough.
The presence of the library is, I love that expression. It is so distressing. I know we hear the stories of, yes, families feel, I'm telling you, caregiving is not an easy job, especially when it's it usually boils down to one person, and there might not always be equal dynamics that makes that easy. It is costly. There is that expression, caregiving burden or responsibility. There is a lot involved, a lot of investment involved. So the fear, the abandonment comes because of, do you think it's lack of awareness, or is it a societal an imposed societal farewell. If we have too many older people, which we already have more older persons now in the world than ever before. So we just got to get with the program and realize that this is what we have to deal with. And also that you and I, everybody's on the trajectory to getting older. Like today you, tomorrow me. And it's just about, I think it's what distresses me is when I see what might seem, I don't know, it's not obvious, but it might, or easy, but it is doable. It's doable to do it in a community. So how as a nurse would you say, because it's definitely difficult for a doctor to actually, um, I find in our setting, in our Caribbean setting especially, and in some other settings too, for just a doctor to say, because then it becomes a medical thing, you know what I mean? As opposed to a community health nurse like yourself. How could you suggest to families? It might be something that needs to be implemented now, but even on a small scale, how could you suggest to families that, hey, you can, here's how you understand aging. Here's how we bridge this gap. Here's how you can talk to Grant. Here's what's happening in her or his brain and how you can be less fearful of it. What would you say? I
I
know it's
think for the
multiple,
most
but
part, public health nurses do engage the public in having like open conversations, going to PTAs, attending churches, attending groups and discussions and participating in conversations like this. It's just raising awareness beyond September to into October, November, December, January. Every month, we should be having these conversations on how we can create better environments for our elderly, to be honest. So as a nurse, I think sometimes I might also feel like there's this big bureaucratic kind of chain, and that, there's so many loops to get through to get something implemented. Does it contradict policy? Who's involved? What resources it would take? Do we have enough staff to mobilize to get it done? How sustainable it is? But at the end of the day, it's for me, it is like, how can we together, the multidisciplinary group, the dietitians, the doctors and nurses, the pharmacists, everybody comes together on the same page, and we're working together for the same goal, which is to improve the livelihoods of that particular population. That's how I see it.
fantastic. So, a model that we could talk about possibly perhaps would be uh, at a community resource center. People have called it different things, but in Mauritius, it's a community resource center where people can
Mm-hmm.
gather safely. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's not just an around table discussion. So you as a nurse aren't telling or talking down, or I as a doctor not talking to you and telling you here's what this is. It's a community event. So we invite the family caregiver, the older person, the health professionals, as we said. We all in our separate little corners, but it really works better when we work together as the team that we ought to be. So the physio, pharmacist, just like you mentioned, and we have a once a month or twice a month. That might be too much. Once a month discussion. Gotta start small, and just bring out mom and dad and caregiver, and then whoever else is brave enough to want to come at a time that suits everyone. And it doesn't have to be difficult. You ask the person, well, hey, can I use your space for 2 hours? And I've found that just having a community center, community uh group. This was before we had lockdown, before when we could have met in bigger groups. We can now again, so it's okay. But prior to that, we it was starting to get we were starting to get some sort of build where we would meet and we would talk among ourselves, and then everybody leaves with a collective understanding, as opposed to what we've seen and what we've heard and what we've culturally become exposed to, which is the doctor or the nurse tells you what to do. That format to me is so archaic.
Let's support the a new health relief model. We want to have models of health promotion that are more inclusive of all of the health professionals involved in making the human a more complete and holistic person. And obviously, as we age, then we need to understand the necessity to have specialist training along those particular parameters. I mean, you don't get a gerontologist to go and see an orthopedic person. So you need to have, they respect you respectfully, like you're a geriatric specialist. So the geriatric nurse obviously would have a different perspective, and then you could do trainer conversations, more community awareness, more empowering, because as you know, knowledge is power. And beyond knowledge is power. It is the implementation of this information and making it practical for everybody. Because we're not just talking to one social space. We do understand that along the society, we have those that are not as entitled. There's great levels of poverty. I mean, they might be watching the television, but what's going on around them? And the poverty is not only linked to finances. It is poverty of relations. It's poverty of nutrition, is poverty of ideas. So we have persons that, just sitting down and they're being old. They don't understand, okay, you don't have to just sit in this position. If you have pain, there's some medication you can take, there's some recommendations you can have. It is really having the understanding of the availability of what is available for you and your family so that you can have a good life, that you can have an easier life, because all about comfort. It's all about, as you know, it's all about being well, Anna. It's all about when you get to be 75, 85, 95, 105, you can still go and get your photo shoots done. You know what I mean? You're still maintaining your health. You're having your regular screening. You're using your lifestyle interventions. You're having your social support system. And you're having accessible psychological care, because if you need to have a professional person to tell you, it doesn't require psychiatry, psychological. You can do some cognitive behavioral therapies, learn how to breathe, learn how to visualize, learn how to be present, I mean, learn how to use mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is not a skill for the young alone, and for the middle and all of this different, divisions of age. I'm young, you're old, you're all old, we're all moving gradually to that space. But to understand that mindfulness in the elderly is equally as important as mindfulness in the adolescents. What the elderly person eats and consumes, how much protein they need to sustain them, how much omega-3s they need additional to support this, what they need to be added to enhance their abilities, all of the support systems, pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical, to ensure that we have happy, healthy old persons running around jogging, making the best life that they can have, and not necessarily extending the retirement age. No, you retire at your good age, you have an opportunity to be free, you have your money, you have your plans, you have good financial management in place. You make sure that you are able to meet your activities of daily living, and that you have a support system in case you need help to navigate around the newer complexities of you working on social media and doing their telebanking, etc.
Taliban that's a whole can by itself. I can tell you to tell people, but it's true. It's a whole new world, and we don't want more persons without not to feel left behind, but also not to feel as though, well, you got to catch up to us because we have no time with you. You mentioned something earlier about the library. A library has in books from the 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 13th century, right down until the latest research yesterday. You're not gonna discard those because those are treasures. So that's where the integration comes. Wisdom comes with the ages, with the sages. Now, that means that all older people are just only wise, and it's a fallacy too. But generally, if we interact with each other, we get to know what each other is thinking. So the community-minded sessions, bringing all of our teams together, setting up a community where persons don't feel afraid to speak on their challenges. Older persons feel included. We get the environment for them. I stress one thing that you said, I'll just mention it again for emphasis, folks. Regular wellness checks. So you're not going to the doctor just because you have pressure, as we call it in Barbados, high blood pressure or sugar, which is diabetes. You go because you want to remain well. You want to know what your nutritional value is. You want to know how your mental health is. How are you sleeping? How's the interaction? Is there anything happened? Has there been a death in the family? How are you coping? All those things we want to be able to do. So I will leave you with the final words, but I will just say thank you very, very much. This has been an eye opener and hopefully a stimulator of further conversation. Who knows? And to the viewers, thank you so much. Nurse Mechell has been just, I know you agree, a fountain of the broader picture, the bigger vision. And that's why it's just a joy to talk to you, Mechell. And remember to share this with a friend, like, subscribe, let persons know we can work this together. We're not out to cure the what we can't cure as human beings, but we're out to work together. So your final words, my dear.
I endorse what you would have said. It's just to make sure you get your screening, you stay well, stay hydrated, stay in love if you can stay in love, and use the all of the tools you have around you, prayer, sunshine, sunlight, and your doctors
There you go.
and
And nurses.
and nurses.
There. So from my heart to
I'm
yours,
not trying to give the
and
nurses more work.
well, that's true. So from my heart to yours, mwah, good morning, good evening, good night. This is a blessing. Thank you, my dear. Bye.
Thank